universe now.
Yo, what up, everyone? Tay here. And I just saw Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 a few hours ago, and I really want to talk about it. So we're going to do a, sort of review video or whatever you want to call it, and it will largely be no spoilers, but I might get into just some brief spoilers at the very end of the video. But before we get into it, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you are a fan of Marvel and the MCU, and also remember to click the bell because I am still getting people telling me they are not being notified when new videos come out, so make sure you have notifications turned on. And if you miss any of the recent videos I put out, you can find those linked in the description down below. And then one other thing, I know I have some super thanks to get to from the last video, and I have not forgotten about those, and thank you very much to those of you who left some super thanks. I saw some good ones, but I'm going to save those super thanks for the next video, so I can just kind of focus on the Guardians review for this video. But if you do want to leave any super thanks on this video with some questions, I will get to those super thanks questions in the next video along with those past ones. So yeah, just wanted to throw that out there real quick, and let's get into it.
Okay. It inspired me to create CounterUp.
I don't care.
All of the good and none of the bad.
I don't need another speech by some impotent whack job whose mother didn't love him, rationalizing why he needs to conquer the universe.
I'm not trying to conquer the universe. I'm perfecting it.
Alright, so getting into everything, one of the things I've seen online that's kind of interesting that I've noticed about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a lot of people's opinions on the movie seem to kind of tie to how they feel about James Gunn and not necessarily the movie itself. Because as I'm sure, many of you know, over the last 3-4 months or whatever since James Gunn was announced as the new co-CEO of DC Studios, he's become a fairly divisive figure because there's, the Zack Snyder fans, they're mad that James Gunn got rid of Henry Cavill and, they see him as kind of ruining the hopes for Zack Snyder to come back and finish his Justice League trilogy. And there's a multitude of other reasons why some people consider James Gunn a divisive figure. And I understand to a degree because I have, kind of mixed feelings about James Gunn's movies. I don't really care what James Gunn said, online or on Twitter. He said stuff on Twitter that I thought was stupid, but he says stuff sometimes that I agree with, but I don't really care either way. I care if he makes good movies or not. And I do think that overall he is a really good director, but I will admit that his movies, to me at least, can kind of go back and forth. Because the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie is one of my favorite MCU films, like top 5 favorite MCU movies. It really was the movie that started to get me really excited for the MCU when that came out in 2014. And so I love that movie, but then when Guardians 2 came out, I was very disappointed in that movie, and I thought it was a big letdown. It's still a watchable movie and enjoyable, but compared to the first one, I was very disappointed. Then he did The Suicide Squad, which I absolutely loved. I love The Suicide Squad. Not as much as like Guardians 1, but I really liked that movie. But then after that, he did Peacemaker, which I couldn't stand. And a lot of the issues I found with Peacemaker was similar to issues I had with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. And then after that, he did the Guardians Holiday Special, which was, whatever. I didn't love it or hate it. It was just what it was. And then Guardians of the Galaxy 3 comes out, and I absolutely loved it. Once again, just like I loved Guardians Volume 1 and The Suicide Squad. So overall, I would say I'm a big fan of James Gunn's movies, but I do think that he can be kind of hit and miss, but when he's on, he's really good. And I also understand, the DC stuff too, because I think that James Gunn will probably do a good job as the new head, Kevin Feige figure over the DCU. But I was also bummed and thought it was pretty lame that he got rid of Henry Cavill as Superman. And I'm also a big fan of a lot of Zack Snyder's movies. I don't talk about it much on this channel, but I absolutely love Man of Steel. It's one of my favorite comic book films, in general. And I also really loved Zack Snyder's Justice League movie. And I really wish Warner Brothers would, and they should, let Zack Snyder finish out his Justice League story with at least one more film. And I really hope that someday that happens. So I get the whole Zack Snyder, James Gunn thing as well, but that doesn't affect how I watch his movies. And yeah, I don't know why I'm even kind of starting this video off with this James Gunn rant or whatever, but that's just something I've noticed online. But let's move on and talk about the movie itself, because like I said, I really, really liked the movie. And one of the things I thought was so impressive about this movie is how seamlessly it blended together different genres and emotions. Because it's really funny, but in a very natural way, like in the first Guardians movie, as opposed to the more forced humor and forced jokes that we saw in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 or a movie like Thor 4. And certain scenes in the movie feel really sweet and emotional, and then that scene can then be followed up by something really dark or some very dark humor or even just straight up violent graphic scenes that delve into some straight up sci-fi horror elements. And for a movie to do that and to kind of mix all these different elements together and blend them together seamlessly is very tricky, and it would be very easy for a lot of less talented directors to make those kinds of transitions feel very jarring. And as we all know by now, the heart of the movie is definitely Rocket. But I think the whole cast really shines in this movie overall. Nebula is really good in this movie, and I've always liked Nebula in the MCU. I know there's a lot of Nebula haters, but I've always liked Nebula, and I thought she was really good in Avengers Endgame, but this is probably her best MCU appearance. And I definitely think this was probably Chris Pratt's best MCU appearance as well. And Chris Pratt's another actor that, is always divisive online and has all sorts of haters. I really like Chris Pratt. I've liked him in all the Guardians movies and every MCU film he's in. But I did think this was, Chris Pratt's best role as Peter Quill in the MCU. Because in this movie, Quill is a little bit more depressed after the loss of his version of Gamora. But he's not like whiny depressed. He's more got this edge to him that we haven't seen in the past, where he comes off as a little bit more intelligent, like he's learned some tough life lessons that have helped him to grow up a little bit, and he's a little bit more cynical, which I like. So yeah, I thought the whole cast overall really shined in this movie, but I think Rocket and Star-Lord were the highlights. And then there's the High Evolutionary, who was also a really cool villain in this movie, and he's just a straight-up bad guy with no chance at redemption or hidden humanity that's buried deep inside. And that's not the kind of villain I would want to see in every MCU project, but it is also nice to sometimes just get a straight-up maniacal, evil narcissist instead of some tortured soul that was once a good person and had something horrible happen to them that turned him into this villain that you feel for. Because you definitely do not feel for the High Evolutionary in this movie, especially if you have pets. If you're a person that has grown up with animals, you will definitely not like the High Evolutionary. And then one of the other things I really liked about this movie was the final battle and how it actually took place in space instead of on a planet like we saw in Guardians Volume 1 or Guardians Volume 2. And the final battle is pretty interesting because, in a way, it's a big final battle because it's out in space and there's all this stuff going on, but it's also a very self-contained scene as well. And it's in the final battle where we get this really cool hallway fight sequence that we've seen in some of the trailers. And this is definitely one of the coolest fight scenes we've seen in the MCU, in my opinion. And normally I'm a fan of the more realistic, kind of combat scenes like we've seen in Captain America Civil War or Captain America the Winter Soldier, where the fight scenes feel very realistic. And that is definitely not what this hallway scene is. This hallway scene is much more stylized. But it's stylized in a very good way that works really well. Because whenever we see stylized battle scenes in movies, it's really easy for them to come off as cheesy or abuse the slow-mo, stuff like that. But this one works just right, and it's filmed to look like a big one-shot. Now, it's obviously not a one-shot, but it's filmed to look like a one-shot, and it's really effective. And what it really reminded me of, that whole sequence, was the big, very graphic church fight in the first Kingsman movie. And that is one of my all-time favorite messed up scenes in a movie ever, which probably makes me sound like a horrible person, but that scene is so cool. And that's what this Guardian scene reminded me of. It's obviously not nearly as graphic as that church scene was, but it has a very similar vibe. And speaking of violence and more graphic content, this movie is definitely probably the most violent and graphic MCU film we've ever seen. And it might sound kind of shallow or immature or whatever, but I really thought that all of that really added to the movie.
Why the need for so much gruesome, graphic violence? Why not let us imagine
Because it's so much fun, Chan.
And I'm not someone who gets off on violent movies just for the sake of violence. You know, in fact, I'm not really a big fan of straight up action movies for the most part. There's some good ones, but overall, I find action movies are usually kind of boring because no matter how cool the action is, if you don't have a good story to go along with it, then those cool action scenes quickly get old. However, if you already have a good story, then I do think that sometimes adding some more graphic and even violent scenes into the movie can really help sell the effectiveness and the stakes of the story. And a good example of this, in my opinion, was Logan. Because if Logan would have been the exact same story but rated PG-13, it still would have been a really good movie. But I do think that the R rating really allowed Logan to be a much better and more effective movie. You know, something about that realness just kind of sucks you into the movie more. And Guardians Volume 3 really made me hopeful that we are going to start seeing some more adult-themed MCU projects in the future that aren't afraid to kind of push up against that PG-13 line or even, you know, get a straight-up R rating. Because there have been reports recently about the Blade movie being rated R, you know, some legitimate reports, and that it's going to be much darker than we would expect. And we know that Deadpool 3 is going to be rated R. So this movie really made me hopeful that we will actually see some rated R MCU projects in the future here and there, and that even some of the PG-13 projects could still be a little bit more adult. And another thing I really liked in this movie was all the crazy sci-fi horror and body horror elements. Especially as a big David Cronenberg fan, I really dug a lot of the more monstrous and disgusting creatures that we saw in the movie. But anyways, now let's quickly talk about where Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 stacks up in the larger MCU. Because a lot of the early media reviews have said it's the best MCU film since Avengers Endgame. And I would probably agree with that. I mean, the only other movie that's come out since Endgame that would come close to this one would probably be Spider-Man No Way Home. And there's been some other good movies in Phase 4 as well, even though Phase 4, for the most part, was kind of more mid-range content. You know, Spider-Man No Way Home was really good. Shang-Chi was really good. I liked Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, even though I know a lot of people didn't. But yeah, this movie definitely feels like it's the best thing to come out since Avengers Endgame. But it even goes beyond that because I would just say this is a really good MCU movie in general. I would say it might even be in my top 10 favorite MCU films. I mean, I would need to see it again to kind of absorb it more before I would say that for sure. But I thought it was really good, and there was nothing in it that ever took me out of the movie. There was never any bad CGI or visual effects or green screen that was apparent in the background, anything like that, like we have seen in some of the other recent projects. The only area that I thought was kind of weak was, unfortunately, Adam Warlock, because they turned him into kind of an idiot. And James Gunn said that Adam Warlock was going to be a child in this movie clear back in like 2017 after Guardians Volume 2 came out. But I do think there's a difference between Adam Warlock not having life experience and being kind of an idiot, which he was kind of an idiot in this movie. But I'm still excited for Adam Warlock in the future of the MCU because I think Will Poulter's a good actor and he'll do fine as that character. And really, even though Adam Warlock was kind of the weakest part of the movie, it didn't affect the movie hardly at all because he's not really that big of a part of the story. And I do hope that this is kind of the beginning of Marvel Studios having a good run of good stuff coming out. Because Marvel Studios have been putting the brakes on things, slowing the production down on stuff as to not rush projects out just because they have a release date. And if you look at what we have coming out the rest of the year after this, Next, we have Secret Invasion, which looks very dark and very gritty and right up my alley, and I'm very excited for that and have high hopes that it will be very good. Then after that is Loki Season 2, which I also think is going to be very good because Loki Season 1 is, in my opinion, one of the best MCU Disney Plus shows. Plus, it's being directed by Benson and Moorhead, who are two of my favorite indie horror directors. So that's another reason I have high hopes for that. Then after that, we have The Marvels, which honestly I do not have as high hopes for. I hope it's good. It looks like it'll probably be better than the first Captain Marvel movie based on the trailer, but it does look more like a sort of Disney-fied MCU film as opposed to the more serious MCU stuff I like Captain America Civil War or Avengers Infinity War, stuff like that. But then after the Marvels, we'll have Daredevil Born Again and Captain America 4 and the Thunderbolts, and the stuff that's coming out in 2024 all looks really good for the most part. So yeah, I am hopeful that this will sort of be the beginning of a run of high-quality MCU content coming out, as opposed to some of the mid-range stuff that we've seen throughout Phase 4. But anyways, I think we'll call it here for this one because I just want to keep this to be a fairly short review video and not get too deep into the weeds, because I will do another video where we can talk about spoilers and talk about the future of some of these characters and what was set up, all that stuff. But for this one, I just wanted to keep it no spoilers, just letting you guys know what I thought and where I thought the movie sat in regards to other recent MCU projects and in the larger MCU as a whole. But yeah, I hope you guys go and see it. And if you have seen it, let me know what you thought of the movie in the comments down below. Leave your own mini reviews, all that stuff. Do you agree with me? Do you totally disagree with me? Whatever. But anyways, as always, subscribe to the channel if you are new here, and please leave a like on the video. And like I said, we will be getting into those past super thanks in the next video, so it's not too late. If you would like to leave a super thanks question on this video, I will get to those in the next video as well. Alrighty, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I will be back soon.